Let's move to the next question, and we can end on this one. What's the next disruption we're blind to? Will, this is one of those words, disruption, that is so cliche, yet so pertinent to what we do. And so let's talk generally about disruption. And everyone says, oh, we're going to go in and disrupt this industry and all those things. What are your feelings? I got strong feelings about this. What are your feelings about the word disruption?
My thing with disruption is obviously overused, oversold, right? Crypto was a perfect example in my mind of something that was a solution waiting for a problem. And it was about all this disruption. And some disruption did happen. I don't want to discount that, but nowhere near what people thought it was going to be. But you know what? There's also other technologies that were supposed to be disruptive that didn't, like VR and AR, that I think are going to be the most important things that ever come out. They just happen to be in the wrong state at the wrong time. Personally, I think AR more so than VR is going to be by far the most disruptive thing.
I think that disruption can be looked at in two things. So let's use AR and VR for a moment. I think people get hyperbolic about disruption and they think something like explodes and there's this novel condition and suddenly we're in, different land, different time, we get transported somewhere and they call that disruption. But for me, disruption is best used when you talk about kind of a catalyst. So it's like all these people are continuing to do one thing one way. And now we're just going to introduce something novel and disrupt, just knock it off the tracks just a little bit to change the trajectory. And like AR, VR, like people, I don't know, man, they started investing billions of dollars into it like 10 years ago, Will. And they say they're going to change everything, this disrupt entertainment, all that stuff. Hasn't happened yet, but we're using it so much more. Like, Will, you've given me demos. You're using AR and VR all the time. And it is disrupting, but it has to have a lot of conditions line up to eventually get to the point where, you know what, when we do call it disruptive, we're like, oh, that made sense. Like Airbnb, oh yeah, it disrupted the hotel industry. That made sense. But 10 years ago, nobody was thinking that way. And that's how I approach it.
I look at disruption that when a new technology comes out, you look at what you were doing today and you say, that sucked. It's the way we look at GPS and maps, right? Like Google Maps, something like that. And I try to explain to my kids what a map used to be, an actual physical map. And they're like, hold on, wait, like, were you Magellan? Like you picked up this piece of paper and you made it to another state? Right? Like, how's that even, like, what if it changed? What if the road changed? What if, I was like, yeah, you went to a gas station, figured it out, right? Like, it was amazing. You look at a step function of technology where it makes it look like what you were doing before, like you were Fred Flintstone powering your car, right? To me, like, that's what disruption. When I look at Airbnb, it's better, right? It's different, right? Airbnb isn't a hotel. Those are two totally different things, but it gave us a new option. Right? So was it disruptive? Yeah, to an extent. When I think of disruption, when I think of things that like shake the system to the ground, the internet was a disruption. I always joke that the internet was one of the few things we sold that actually worked. Right? Like people like me were out there running around talking about a million technologies. And that was the only one in my semi-brief history on this planet that actually was undersold. Like whatever we were saying, as big as it could get, it actually got way bigger than anything we predict back then. I do think AI has that geometric capability. I do think that AR has that geometric capability.
But Will, you were, I don't know, what do we call it, Will? Smart enough? I know you'd be self-deprecating and say, no, I wasn't. Wise enough, insightful enough to see that the internet was coming. It's like Game of Thrones. They say winter is coming and nobody believes them until the zombies are going to kill everybody, right? But it's the opposite. You saw this optimistic view of the internet. I saw it with online animation. And I saw it, using different technology to do it, that we could stream it. And people were like, no, that's super, super hard. It's super expensive. No one's going to hand draw animation and put it on the internet, right? We need to be making like Disney movies again, right? But you had the foresight to do it. So how do you learn that? How do founders get into the habit of saying, hey, I can look in the future and see around the corner that nobody else can?
And part of it is just natural curiosity. Ed, you know me, I'm freakishly annoyingly curious about everything. I'm the person that'll sit next to you on the airplane and be like, hey, what do you do for a living? And I'll ask you about 9,000 questions, right? Similar to a guy in Hulk right? I didn't know who that guy was, right? It's just some random dude. And I want to find out what his story was, right? And I found that my curiosity has been my secret weapon, right? I look at everything and I always say the same things. What if this could do that? And the other thing I think about is why not? Like, why isn't that working that way? Why can't I do that? Ed, you know this, like, I've become like a pretty good carpenter. Right? Because I looked at carpentry and I was like, well, it all follows a series of skills, right? All which can be learned. Like the people that are doing carpentry aren't Beethoven. They don't have like some secret skill that the world will never have. They're pushing a friggin' power saw, right? Like who cares? But I'm willing to get into it. Same with generative AI. Like I got all these stable diffusion servers running, right? I'm like, how hard could it be? But I'm curious, what if I can create the show we're making right now without us actually having to make it? What if? Let's find out.
Curiosity, though, requires people willing to observe. And I think a lot of people just in general have put these blinders on because they're kind of in their own minds that way. But I'll tell a story about how someone was able to identify disruption. These were the original investors in YouTube. They did pretty good for themselves, right? And here's what happened. They're walking through an office and they're literally seeing people waste their time by playing YouTube on their office computers. And they're like, wait a second, this could be a thing. Let's go invest in this company. Same thing happened with some of these chat programs out of Asia. I remember listening to a story about Kakao Talk. And the Westerners didn't know how Easterners, people in Asia, were using chat and these platforms differently. And they were like, everybody's using this. And I'm hearing all these stories. So let's investigate more. And they started asking the questions like you did. And I think that's the superpower. Observe, then be willing to ask questions without imposing your own bias or your own thoughts on it.
Yeah, I like going into things saying, I don't know anything, and that's my superpower. And when I say that, when I say I don't know anything, it's my way of saying I don't have to worry about being wrong because I don't expect to be right. And you're right. So I'll go into something like I learned a ton about architecture, and I went into that field and I said, I don't know anything about architecture, but here's what I know. I know that I can draw a box. And I know that every room is some version of a box, and I can extrude a box, right? And I picked up from there. And you've been to my house on that same VR headset, and you've walked through the house that I've designed from scratch, just because I was like, how hard could it be? It's not hard. It's just that you just don't know it yet. And that's always been our design philosophy with everything we do at Startups.com. Pitch deck isn't hard. You just don't know how to do it yet. Funding isn't hard. It's still effort. But not knowing how to do it makes it 1,000 times harder. Somebody teaches you a little trick, the tool, etc., and you fly through it.
One thing I want to double click on that you said when you ask why not, Will, I love it when someone says, no, that can't be done. It's too hard. To me, that's where an opportunity is because nobody's going to be willing to do it. And if I'm willing to jump in there, then who knows what can happen. And we said this last show, this is where founders get to do things that other people don't. And we're allowing you to say, hey, go try that hard thing where other people will say, no, too much of a risk. Stay in school. All right. Don't do drugs. Very important. But go ahead and do that hard thing. We'll do it with you. That's what we're all about here, Will.
Every great invention started with somebody saying, why not? Right. I mean, it's kind of like the universal starting point. And I look at it just as in life in general. And I'm like, why can't I do this? Right. Like I've done 9 companies in 9 different industries. I used to do casting for television, right? That was around the time that I met Mr. Mizell. And at the same time, I was doing unsubscribe.com, which was an algorithm to get you off all of your email. Totally different businesses, right? But I'm like, why not? Why can't I be in Hollywood doing casting? Like no one has any idea who I am, but why can't I do that, right? Why can't I build an algorithm that gets you off of email that actually powered a ton of unsubscribe behavior? Why not? Just try it, right? Get into it. That's what we do.
And keep asking that question, founders. Even though you may have the solution in your mind, just keep asking the why not question. It's going to help you iterate your product,